Tonight on Primetime, the European Union's next chapter is in focus as Iceland prepares to decide whether to join the bloc. So what does the poll say? Let's explore. Icelanders will decide this weekend whether to reopen negotiations on membership of the European Union. A new poll puts support for joining the bloc narrowly ahead in the polls. But the debate goes far beyond Europe, with fishing rights, national independence and security all playing a role.
Support for restarting Iceland's EU membership negotiations has slipped further, with a new poll putting the two sides just 2.6 percentage points apart. The Mosquina survey of 1,019 people found 51.3% support restarting talks with Brussels, while 48.7% are opposed. That's down from a poll on 13th August, when support stood at 52.2%. Iceland will vote on the issue on Saturday, 29th August. But this isn't a vote on EU membership itself. A yes vote would allow negotiations to restart, and any eventual deal would then have to be put to voters in a second referendum. Fishing remains at the heart of the debate. Iceland's fishing industry is central to both its economy and national identity, and opponents fear EU membership could mean losing control over the country's fishing grounds.
We have 100% of the profit in Iceland, and we want to keep it that way. So that is our worries if we join the common fisheries policy, is that this value chain that has generated all this profit for the Icelandic population, that will be torn apart.
For others, it's a broader question of keeping control over the country's own affairs. The debate has also been shaped by the cost of living, the war in Ukraine, and repeated threats by US President Donald Trump to annex Greenland. Iceland is already part of the European single market and the Schengen area. It's also a member of the European Free Trade Association. But it has no formal influence over EU decision-making. A Foreign Ministry memo estimates that, if Saturday's vote is in favour, accession talks could begin by the end of 2026 and take between 18 and 24 months to conclude.
Kazakhstan is looking to strengthen international support for a major green energy project linking Central Asia and the South Caucasus. Together with Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan, it's developing a trans-Caspian energy corridor that could eventually open a new route for green electricity exports. Our correspondent Fariza Kalimurzuna has more.
Kazakhstan is working with the European Commission on a project to transmit green electricity across the Caspian Sea. The country's energy ministry says the initiative is being developed together with Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan. Astana is seeking the Commission's institutional support, as the corridor could eventually provide a new route for green electricity exports to European markets. The idea is to create an energy corridor that would carry electricity from Central Asia across the Caspian to Azerbaijan. In the longer term, it could connect the energy systems of Central Asia and the South Caucasus, opening opportunities to export green electricity to Europe and other markets. And this could be a major venture. According to the project's consultant, it could integrate up to 5 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030. At this stage, it's still in the planning phase. A feasibility study is underway to determine how the corridor would work, its main technical details and its financial model. That study is expected to be completed in January 2027. Around 1 million euros has been allocated for the work, funded by the Asian Development Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The three countries have already taken steps towards implementation. In June last year, Kazakhstan's Kigok, Azerbaijan's Azer Energy and the National Electric Grid of Uzbekistan signed an agreement to set up a joint company to move the project forward. Fariza Kalimurzuna, Almaty, A News.
So how realistic is this vision, and could the Caspian become a major route for green electricity exports? To discuss this, I'm joined by Nikola Mikovic, a political analyst who speaks to us from Belgrade, Serbia. Mr. Mikovic, thank you for making time to join us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Mr. Mikovic, how strategically important is the Trans-Caspian and Green Energy Corridor for Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan?
It is extremely important, although I have to emphasize that it will take time before the project is completed, because unlike the middle corridor that already exists and that requires modernization, this project called the Trans-Caspian Green Energy Corridor does not exist yet.
Yes.
Although several major international companies are already involved in the construction of solar power plants and windmills and other green energy infrastructure, both in Central Asia as well as in Azerbaijan. So I think it will take time before they build the necessary infrastructure. The problem could be the financial aspect, because it remains to be seen how economically viable it is to build the submarine cable through the Caspian Sea. But the fact that the European Union remains heavily involved in this project clearly suggests that they don't intend to give up on that ambition, and that in the long term, it is entirely possible that Central Asian nations and Azerbaijan will be heavily involved in this project. Now, if you allow me, I would just like to also emphasize that in this project, Azerbaijan is not merely a transit country like Georgia, for instance, because Azerbaijan is also expected to produce green energy. And when I spoke with the Azerbaijani energy officials in the past, they confirmed that they aim to heavily invest in the modernization and in the construction of green energy facilities all over the country, including in Karabakh, aiming to export green electricity to Europe together with Central Asian countries, while at the same time they will continue producing natural gas and oil.
Mr. Mikovic, but how technically challenging will it be to transmit large volumes of electricity through the Caspian Sea?
Well, experts say that it could be very challenging and that the financial aspect is crucial here. Although, as your reporter said, the feasibility study is yet to be fully developed. So at this point, I think it's too early to say that. But I think it is possible to implement such a project because technology will continue to play an important role in our everyday lives. So it's entirely possible that solution to this potential problem will eventually be found. But also the fact that all these countries that we mentioned, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Azerbaijan, continue building green energy facilities all over their territories, also suggests that they plan to export green energy, not just to use it domestically. So I'm fairly positive when it comes to this project. I think that Europe will sooner or later have to begin importing electricity from Central Asia and also from Azerbaijan in order to resolve its domestic problems, especially if it continues the process of the so-called energy divorce from Russia. Then it will definitely need more energy from other suppliers.
Mr. Mikovic, the project could integrate up to 5 gigawatts of renewable capacity by 2030. Is this target realistic?
I think it is, yes, especially given that, as I said, various international companies, including Mazda and Chinese companies and so on, are involved in the construction of green energy infrastructure in Central Asia as well as in Azerbaijan. So in my view, they created the necessary studies and they it is quite realistic from their perspective that there is a potential for something like this. Although, as I emphasized already, the problem could be the Caspian Sea cable, but again, I think it could be resolved, of course, with cooperation between all these nations and with the help of the European Union. But also, there are other actors who are involved in this a project. It is not a pure coincidence that recently South Korean and Azerbaijani energy officials discussed cooperation in the field of green energy. And also in that context, we should also view recently established eternal alliance or partnership between Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan, because the two countries also aim to jointly export green electricity to Europe.
So what are the biggest obstacles at this stage? Financing, technology, regulation, electricity market integration, or political coordination?
I think all of them. Although I would like to point out that as a Serb and someone living in Serbia, I envy Central Asian states and Azerbaijan as well, because the European Union, despite all of its problems, is willing to invest and to help those countries build green energy infrastructure, aiming to eventually begin purchasing green electricity from them. Unlike here in Serbia, where they would like to exploit lithium, which could create serious problems for the environment. And that's not the case when it comes to green electricity. So Azerbaijan and Central Asian countries, from that perspective, are in a much better position. Although, as you said, there are potential problems, political as well as economic and financial. But the fact that Azerbaijan is now widely seen, if not as part of Central Asia, then as someone who has very close relations with the region, tells me that the European Union's policymakers and possibly also policymakers in Washington are willing to invest in this project. And also there are other actors who are interested in this project. China, as we said, is also investing in the development of green energy sectors in Central Asia. And that's something China and Europe, despite their rivalry, have in common. They are all interested in the development of green energy sectors in the region for their own reasons, of course.
So in your view, could green electricity eventually be complemented by exports of green hydrogen, ammonia, or other clean energy products from Central Asia?
Yes, that's what all these countries seek to do, and that's what the European Union also wants to import from them. But again, it will need to invest heavily to help them develop necessary infrastructure. And I think that's one of the reasons why other institutions, for instance, Asian Development Bank or the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank are also involved in green energy projects across the region. But again, that will not happen overnight. It will take time. First, there are feasibility studies and projects, of course, rounds of talks and negotiations until they reach final agreement. So it could take years, maybe even decades, before all that is fully implemented. But I think in the long term, yes, the European Union does not have much choice but to import green electricity and other forms of energy from Central Asia and from Azerbaijan. But that does not mean that the EU will stop importing natural gas and oil. So it needs both fossil fuels and green electricity. Although I think in the future, green energy will play a more important role.
So, Mr. Mikovic, looking ahead to 2030 and beyond, do you believe this corridor could transform the Caspian region into a major clean energy hub connecting Asia with Europe?
2030, so that's in 3.5 years from now.
Yes.
I'm not sure that's realistic. I would say 5 years at least. So in the long term, yes. In the meantime, I expect European companies as well as Asian companies, possible American corporations, to continue investing in the development of the green energy sectors of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Azerbaijan, aiming to eventually fully implement the Trans-Caspian Green Energy Corridor. So, in my view, in the next 5 years, we could see this project implemented. But again, unless something dramatically happens, like the escalation of the war between the US and Iran, or potential direct confrontation between the EU and Russia. So unless that happens, it is entirely possible that the project will be implemented in the next 5 years.
Nikola Mikovic, thank you very much for talking to A News. We truly appreciate your time and insights. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. After the break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the world. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime on A News. France's growing debt burden is becoming a key issue in campaigning ahead of next year's presidential election. A controversial proposal to cancel part of the country's debt has intensified the debate over whether voters should back higher taxes or deeper spending cuts. Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where a radical proposal to wipe out part of France's public debt collides with a presidential race already being reshaped by economic anxiety. Far-left candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon wants the Bank of France to cancel the government bonds it holds. He says the bank could simply take the 18% of French public debt and, quote, just chuck it in the fire, reducing the debt burden and freeing up money for public spending. Former IMF chief economist Olivier Blanchard has called the debate over the proposal idiotic. In an exchange on X, he argued cancellation would largely amount to an accounting exercise because the Bank of France would lose interest in profits it would otherwise return to the French government, while potentially undermining investor confidence. And that matters with French debt already above 116% of GDP. Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu issued an even starker warning on X. France needs to raise a record 310 billion euros this year, and he questioned who would keep lending if the country reneged on its commitments, warning investors could demand exorbitant interest rates. Later today, the argument moves onto the campaign stage. Mélenchon joins Marine Le Pen, Gabriel Attal, Edouard Philippe, Bruno Retailleau, Raphael Glucksmann, and Marine Tondelier for the first televised debate of the 2027 presidential campaign. Candidates will face questions from business leaders and respond to a consultation involving nearly 66,000 company executives. Expect debt, taxes, investment, and competitiveness to dominate, with Mélenchon under pressure to show his economic agenda can withstand scrutiny from businesses, investors, and political rivals. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian says Tehran used the right of self-defense when it targeted U.S. bases in the region after attacks from Israel and U.S. military. Turaj Shurialilo reports from Tehran.
Iran's president says that Tehran defended its sovereignty and independence when being attacked by Israel and the U.S. Speaking at the opening ceremony of the Islamic Unity Conference on Thursday, Masoud Pezeshkian added that it was Tehran's inherent right of self-defense to strike U.S. bases in regional countries which were used to attack Iran. He urged the neighboring and regional Islamic states to stop providing their territory for attacks on the other Islamic countries, as well as calling for joint security and defense cooperation with them. Meantime, the Qatari Foreign Minister Mohammed Al Thani is scheduled to visit Tehran on Thursday. According to the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai, meetings will be part of the ongoing Iran-Qatar consultations aimed at expanding bilateral relations and strengthening regional peace and security. The spokesman added that the Qatari Prime Minister and Foreign Minister will discuss the continuation of Qatar's mediation efforts and initiatives, as well as other regional developments with Iranian officials. This visit follows meetings with his Omani counterpart as well as Pakistan's army chief earlier this week in Tehran. In a new development, the head of Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, Mohammad Eslami, said that the United Nations nuclear watchdog is not authorized to visit the bomb sites. Speaking to reporters, he stressed that inspection of Iran's damaged sites will be barred until a special protocol is agreed between Tehran and the International Atomic Energy Agency. Turash Shiralilu from Tehran for A News.
Turkey's trade minister has been in Damascus for talks on reconstruction and investment. Turkey and Syria are looking to deepen commercial and economic ties with the two neighbors, aiming for $10 billion in annual bilateral trade by the start of the next decade. Adam Moore reports from Istanbul.
Turkish Trade Minister Ömer Bolat held a series of meetings in Damascus on Wednesday as Ankara looks to expand its economic role in Syria's recovery and reconstruction. Bolat visited the Syrian capital with a high-level Turkish business delegation for the 63rd Damascus International Fair. Bolat and his accompanying delegation met Syrian Economy and Industry Minister Nidal El-Shar, with whom they discussed means of increasing bilateral trade to $10 billion a year. The two sides also discussed ways to ease the movement of goods by improving cross-border transport and customs procedures. They also reviewed opportunities for Turkish companies to participate in Syria's post-conflict reconstruction. Turkish business representatives who accompanied the minister also outlined longer-term investment plans aimed at expanding production and creating jobs. Economic ties between Turkey and Syria have accelerated since the fall of President Bashar al-Assad's government in late 2024. Turkey has since emerged as a key regional supporter of Syria's post-Assad leadership after years of backing the country's armed opposition during Syria's lengthy internal conflict. Ankara is now seeking a major role in Syria's reconstruction, especially in terms of infrastructure, energy, transport, and manufacturing. For Turkey, expanding trade and investment in Syria could help stabilize its southern neighbor while also rebuilding economic links disrupted by more than a decade of war. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Meanwhile, there has been a sharp rise in demand for rental accommodation from Russians in Georgia's and Armenia's capital cities. That's according to data from the investigative news outlet Vajnya Istorie. It says the increase is driven by anxiety over a possible new draft tied to elections in Russia's State Duma. It comes as Russia's own customs service confirms record numbers of its citizens are crossing into Georgia through the Larsi checkpoint. Nini Nikolashvili has more from Tbilisi.
Thousands of Russians are searching for apartments in Georgia and Armenia right now, according to reports. It seems not because of a war order that's been signed, but because of one they are afraid is coming. No mobilization decree exists yet, but across Russia, chatter about a new draft tied to the State Duma elections is enough to send people looking for an exit, and Tbilisi is one of their top destinations. According to independent news agency Vajnya Istorie, demand for long-term rentals from Russian citizens in the Georgian capital jumped 20 to 30% compared to last year, pushing average rents about $12.3 per square meter, more than $2 higher than the year before. In Yerevan, demand climbed even faster, up to 35%, with real estate agencies fielding several new inquiries a day, according to the report. Housing administrators describe a split reaction among Russians, saying some are locking in long-term leases to avoid future price spikes if mobilization hits, while others are booking short stays, betting the call-up won't come until after the Duma vote. This is not an isolated trend. It follows Russia's own customs data, which shows up to 20,000 of its citizens are crossing every day at the Larsi border into Georgia. Georgia's Parliamentary Committee Chairman Levan Mahashvili dismissed the concern outright, calling it a storm in a teacup stirred up by politicians, and insists the border traffic reflects nothing more than an ordinary tourist season. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Tashkent is preparing for a major expansion of its logistics infrastructure with a new terminal planned in partnership with international logistics company DP World. Our correspondent Sevil Rajapova reports from Tashkent.
United Arab Emirates-based logistics company DP World is set to begin construction of a $288 million logistics terminal in Tashkent. The facility is expected to handle up to 150,000 containers and 120 million tons of cargo, providing additional capacity for the movement and processing of goods. The first ton for the project is expected to be laid in October. President Shavkat Mirziyoyev welcomed the plans, saying, "We have been preparing for this for a long time. This project is very important for us. It is necessary." The terminal is being developed as Tashkent expands its logistics and industrial infrastructure. The area around the existing industrial zone already has a project portfolio worth $1.2 billion, with 10 projects planned to launch this year. The project comes as the capital sees strong growth in investment and trade. Tashkent attracted $5.6 billion in investment in the first 8 months of 2026, while the city is targeting $9 billion by the end of this year and exports of $4 billion. Cyril Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Hospitals are overwhelmed in Afghanistan as UNICEF says 3.7 million children are currently suffering from acute malnutrition. The latest figures come as the country faces a deepening malnutrition crisis. Our correspondent has the details from Kabul.
Afghanistan's youngest children are the most affected by malnutrition. That's what UNICEF is saying, adding that hospitals in some parts of the country are struggling to cope with the growing number of cases. According to the United Nations agency, 3.7 million children across the country are suffering from acute wasting, including around 1 million with severe acute malnutrition. Children under the age of 2 account for 83% of severe acute malnutrition cases, while nearly 40% of the children hospitalized under 6 months old have severe wasting and medical complications. Hospitals are under growing pressure, with some in southern Afghanistan treating 3 to 4 severely malnourished children per bed. Meanwhile, complicated cases have risen by a third, from 6,000 in July 2025 to 8,000 this July. UNICEF says the crisis is being driven by food insecurity, repeated droughts and floods, regional instability and growing pressure on jobs and public services. The return of more than 6 million people since 2023 has also placed additional strain on already stretched housing and health services. Funding shortages are also severely limiting treatment. UNICEF nutrition programs received just 22% of the $180 million it needs. This severe resource gap has forced more than 100 wasting centers to close this year. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Now we have a short break. Right after the break, we'll take a look at all the top stories making the headlines today. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime on A News. People in Belgrade have reacted with sorrow or indifference to the death of former Bosnian Serb General Ratko Mladic. The 83-year-old was serving a life term in prison, convicted of genocide over the 1995 Srebrenica massacre. He was said to have been in ill health and repeatedly hospitalized in recent years. Mladic was convicted of orchestrating the killing of at least 8,000 Muslims. He was nicknamed the Butcher of Bosnia and had been held at the United Nations Detention Center since his arrest in 2011.
It's just sad, sad indeed. The way I see it, he was a JNA officer who was simply defending the constitution of SFRY. I genuinely believe he protected the Serbian people because, after all, that was his duty.
I don't really have much to say about it. To be honest, I don't feel one way or the other.
It's a shame. I think it's an injustice that he was even thrown in The Hague to begin with, and that we Serbs are our own worst enemies. I believe that's the biggest problem with our nation.
The growing trade rift between the United States and Canada is now hitting one of North America's biggest industries. Automakers are facing rising costs as the two neighbors remain at odds over tariffs.
Canadian automakers are facing higher costs after talks between the two countries broke down and Washington moved to double tariffs on Canadian vehicles and parts.
Good conversation with the Prime Minister last night.
US President Donald Trump announced on Monday that a 50% tariff on Canadian cars, trucks and auto parts will take effect on the 1st of January. That is up from the current 25%. The move came just days after manufacturers had hoped the two countries would reach a deal to reduce tariffs to 15% on Canadian cars and light-duty trucks. Canadian-built vehicles accounted for about 6% of American vehicle sales last year, but the impact could still be significant for companies including Ford, General Motors, Stellantis, Toyota and Honda. Toyota and Honda together produced more than 75% of Canada's 1.2 million vehicles in 2025. Higher duties on parts could also raise costs throughout the North American supply chain, as components regularly cross the US-Canada border during production. Meanwhile, US Trade Representative Jameson Greer said there are currently no further talks between Washington and Ottawa. On Wednesday, Trump stepped up his rhetoric, saying it was time to teach Canada after the talks collapsed. Canada has already retaliated, imposing duties on around $20 billion worth of American imports, due to take effect on the 8th of September, alongside support for affected businesses and workers. White House advisor Peter Navarro warned that any future deal would be worse for Canada than the offer it rejected last week. However, industry sources remain hopeful that the January deadline leaves enough time for the two sides to reach an agreement and prevent the higher auto tariffs from taking effect.
Israel's Prime Minister says efforts to resolve the confrontation with Iran remain uncertain. Benjamin Netanyahu claims he urged Donald Trump to consider a tighter siege on Iran at talks in Washington last month, before the latest sanctions were announced. He insists Israel will continue to act to defend itself.
We won't let Iran attack us, and if they attack us, they will suffer a blow they never dreamed of, much stronger than what they have suffered until now.
6 months into the Iran war, the impact is being felt across different industries. In southern Iran, fishermen and traders say security concerns and fuel shortages are disrupting their livelihoods, and seafood prices are rising.
The war has hit Iran's fishing industry, with fewer boats heading out to sea, causing seafood prices to rise. At the fish market in the southern port city of Bandar Abbas, traders say they're growing more concerned about security as fuel supplies are being squeezed.
The war has limited our fishing. Our fishermen rarely go out to sea now. It's nothing like before. Another impact has been on fuel supplies. Less fuel is reaching the boats, which has made matters even worse. As a result, fewer fish are being caught, and that drives up fish prices.
Bandar Abbas is one of Iran's most important coastal cities. It sits on the Strait of Hormuz, a vital shipping route for global energy supplies, but shipping has been severely disrupted since the end of February. The disruption comes as the war enters its 6th month, with no clear path to ending the conflict. President Donald Trump had previously predicted the war would be over in 4 weeks. Now, in apparent recognition that further military strikes won't force concessions from Iran, the United States is reverting to a campaign of economic pressure in hopes of further weakening Iran's government. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has told allies the US is unlikely to launch new attacks for the time being. But what happens next is unclear. For fishermen and fish traders in Bandar Abbas, the impact is already clear.
Syria is moving toward reconnecting with the global financial system. It comes after Washington officially removed the country from its list of state sponsors of terrorism. In a show of support for the country's financial future, its president was seen making an electronic payment at a Damascus restaurant on Wednesday.
Ahmad al-Shara was using a Visa card seen at the Damascus cafe in the presence of Syrian Central Bank Governor Safwat Raslan. After the removal of the country from the US list of state sponsors of terrorism, efforts are underway to restore access to international financial services across the country. The ending of sanctions that have lasted more than 4 decades has opened the door for foreign investment and reconstruction efforts in Syria. Al-Shara called the decision a turning point, saying his country is entering a new phase of rebuilding and development. Washington said the move reflects steps by Syria's new government to distance itself from terrorism after months of negotiations. The decision has received regional support, with Turkey welcoming it as a step towards Syria's recovery. Companies such as Bank of America and MasterCard are also exploring ways to reconnect Syria with global financial networks. The return of international card payments could make trade easier, provide safer transactions, improve access to digital services, and help attract investment.
Meanwhile, talks aimed at shaping Gaza's post-war future are continuing at the United Nations, with members discussing security, governance and reconstruction plans. It comes as disagreements remain over the disarmament of Hamas, Israeli withdrawal from the Strip, and the role of international forces in the territory.
I hear a lot of critics, as the High Representative said, hand-wringing and criticizing, but I don't hear a lot of alternative, credible plans. Now, for the first time, troops and personnel from partner nations are scheduled to arrive to keep the peace. Tactical vehicles are already at the ISF logistics base. Countries as far as Uganda, Morocco, Kazakhstan have offered thousands of troops to this effort. No, they are not moving as quickly as we would like, but they are moving. And yes, the disarmament of Hamas must and will be closely scrutinized. It must be verified by objective parties.
The Organization of Islamic Cooperation is holding its 23rd extraordinary session of the Council of Foreign Ministers at its headquarters in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The meeting is expected to include the election of a new OIC Secretary General to succeed Hussein Ibrahim Taha, whose term ends in November. Foreign ministers are also discussing the latest developments in the Palestinian issue, along with the organization's next phase and efforts to strengthen joint Islamic action and advance the interests of member states. More of the top global news stories now, and chip maker Nvidia is forecasting a sharp rise in sales in the coming years, signaling that the boom in spending on artificial intelligence is still growing. Nvidia says it expects revenue in 2028 to grow by around 70%, while forecasting third quarter revenue of $108 billion, slightly above analysts' expectations. They added that demand for AI computing remains strong, although shortages of memory components could limit the industry's expansion. The company also plans, along with Amazon Web Services, to deploy 2 million additional graphics processing units next year and in 2028. The so-called GPUs are needed for the new generation of AI technology. Armenia's former president Robert Kocharyan has been remanded in custody for 2 months following a ruling by the country's top anti-corruption court. Kocharyan remains in hospital after his health worsened following recent heart surgery. He's accused, along with others, of using his position to acquire public property at below market value prices during his 10 years in office until 2008. He was detained alongside his son and 4 others in raids on family businesses on Tuesday. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan also addressed Robert Kocharyan's detention at a press briefing on Thursday. He said that former presidents Robert Kocharyan, Gagik Sarukyan and Sarkisyan should live in their pensions and legal income, and any assets acquired illegally must be returned to the Armenian state and its people.
If this is a question of giving instructions, I am not instructing the judicial system. I am demanding from it, especially since that judge has already retired. Go and look into his and his family's entire assets, both in Armenia and abroad. We are now cooperating with international anti-corruption networks, and Armenia's law enforcement system is cooperating with them. Go and see what his relatives are involved in. Could it turn out that they are, once again, talented business people, each a millionaire or even a billionaire? We have to go after everyone. Them, their mothers-in-law, sisters-in-law, brothers-in-law, everyone. They must explain why criminals like Serge Sargsyan and Robert Kocharian are still free.
Meta has agreed to major changes to how teenagers use Facebook and Instagram. It ends a high-profile U.S. legal battle over claims that Meta designed addictive products that hooked young people and misled the public about the safety of its platforms.
Meta has agreed to pay up to $17 billion and introduce new safety measures for teenagers, settling claims that Facebook and Instagram were designed to encourage excessive use among young users. The agreement brings an early end to a high-profile federal trial in which 29 US states accused the company of misleading the public about risks linked to its platforms. California Attorney Channel said the settlement would require major changes to better protect children online.
We sued Meta over claims that it designed and deployed harmful features on Instagram and Facebook that drive compulsive use and harm young users' mental health, and that the company knew about these dangers and lied to teens, to parents, and to the public about them. We believe the proposed settlement filed today addresses some of the concerns at the core of our lawsuit and that it will force transformative changes necessary to protect our children. And importantly, these changes will be made within months. No more waiting.
Under the agreement, Meta will provide up to $17 billion to participating states over 10 years. California could receive between $1.5 and $2.1 billion if the settlement is approved. The company will also introduce new restrictions for teenage users, including a 2-hour daily limit and overnight access blocks between midnight and 6 a.m., unless parents allow otherwise. The settlement also includes stronger parental controls and additional measures to prevent children from accessing harmful content.
At least 362 people are reported dead and over 1,000 are missing after a massive flash flood along the border between Nepal and China's Tibet region. An international rescue operation has been launched with hundreds of foreign tourists unaccounted for.
The disaster hit Nepal's northern regions after severe flooding and landslides swept through villages, roads and trekking routes near the border with China. Rescue teams supported by helicopters and drones are searching for survivors as authorities continue to assess the scale of the destruction. The flooding has affected hundreds of foreign travelers in one of Nepal's most popular Himalayan tourism areas. The Nepal Tourism Board says 644 tourists are currently out of contact, including 517 foreign nationals from 19 countries. Those reported missing include travelers from India, the United States, Ukraine, Australia, the United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, South Korea, and Japan. Several European governments have issued safety warnings and emergency contacts for their citizens in Nepal. Among those missing are tourists and pilgrims traveling toward Mount Kailash and Lake Manasaravar in China. Australia said 34 citizens are unaccounted for, while authorities are working to confirm the status of affected travelers. Nepal has deployed more than 5,000 army and police personnel for search and rescue operations, evacuating residents and delivering emergency supplies to isolated areas. The disaster has triggered an international response. India has sent relief supplies, including shelters, medicines and hygiene kits. China, the European Union, the United States, South Korea, the World Health Organization and the Red Cross have also announced assistance. Authorities are urging travelers in affected areas to stay calm, follow official safety instructions and report their location to police, local authorities, travel agencies or tour operators. Early assessments suggest the flooding may have been linked to a glacier-related event that sent large amounts of water and debris into rivers, causing widespread destruction.
The dispute between European football officials, UEFA, and the game's global governing body, FIFA, appears to be easing. UEFA is expected to drop its threat to boycott FIFA competitions. It follows assurances that controversial plans to sell stakes in major tournaments have been abandoned.
The Union of European Football Associations is expected to end its threat to boycott FIFA tournaments after receiving assurances that plans to sell stakes in the World Cup and other major competitions will not be revived. The dispute began after FIFA proposed the idea, prompting UEFA's 55 member associations to agree on a potential boycott of FIFA events. FIFA later withdrew the proposal in July, and UEFA officials are expected to confirm the end of the boycott threat at a meeting in Monaco. A UEFA source said the decision was not a defeat, but aimed at protecting players' opportunities, while the push for changes within FIFA would continue. Despite easing tensions, UEFA is expected to maintain pressure on FIFA President Gianni Infantino over the issue. European League's president Claudius Schäfer has also called for reforms at FIFA, saying Infantino should not continue in the role. Infantino, who is seeking a fourth term next year, faces opposition from several football confederations, including UEFA, the Asian Football Confederation and CONCACAF.
From all of us here at A News, thank you for your time and for watching.